Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about the things parents and their kids, from young teens to 20-somethings, might experience in their lives and relationships. The good, the bad, and sometimes even the ugly. In this episode number 6, we're handling the topic of money. I'm Marci, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cayd, and I'm her kid. The topic of money is something that is very important to me and I'm really passionate about. I like making money. I like spending money, just all things with money. I like saving money. I love it all. So we're here today. We're going to talk about a little bit of dollars, a little bit of cents, and just talk about the overall topic of money, especially as it pertains to relationships between parents and young adults. We are not money experts by any means. We both have a history of working in banking. We both have personal history of just dealing with finances and stuff like that. We are definitely not experts. We're just here to share our experiences and talk about what works for us. So, I mean, just to start it off, Mom, what would you say is a good things about parents teaching their kids about money and how they can benefit from it, and what parents should teach their kids and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I think, it starts out when kids are little, teaching them about money, right? And I remember, and you can talk a little bit about it, but I remember we used to give you guys allowance, and we tried it multiple ways. Like, we tried it tied to chores. You were the child who always would do your siblings' chores so you could earn extra money. Even if they wanted to do their chores, you tried to talk them out of doing their chores so that you could do them instead. And sometimes we just did, here's your allowance for being part of a member of this family, and you're expected to contribute, but those two things were not connected. You guys were given money to spend if we went on family vacations. You had a spending allowance and could choose something that you wanted. We never had a ton of extra money floating around. And so I've always been very, very thrifty, shop all the sales. I remember my sister and I going to the outlet mall at the end of every season and buying clothes for our kids for the following year. I remember paying $1.97 for shirts at Old Navy. And so I was always thrifty about that. I always put coupons back in the day when that was a thing for groceries. And so I tried to pass that on to my kids that, you can have nice things, you can live a really nice life, but you have to be smart about it. So I also tried to be honest with kids when at times when money was tight or we didn't have money for the thing that they wanted. One of my earlier memories of money is I really wanted Guess jeans. This would have been back in the early 80s. And my mom had money for Lee jeans. And so I didn't want the Lee jeans. She said, I'll give you the money for the Lee jeans, but you're paying the rest to have the Guess jeans. And you can bet I had 2 pair of Guess jeans that were purchased that way. And I wore them all the way through college. So, but I had used my money to spend them. So it was important to me. So I think the value of money is something very important to teach kids as well. So, Cayd, with that little brief overview of why I think it's important for parents to teach their kids about money, tell us a little bit about some of the lessons you learned and how it affects your financial habit.
For sure. I mean, I think kind of like you mentioned, we share some of the experiences of growing up with kids. I remember kind of like with your story about jeans, there were certain things growing up that I wanted, whether it was clothes or toys or blah, blah, whatever, that you would say, okay, well, I've got, $40 for new clothes. And if you want more, you've got to come up with it. Or, if I wanted new shoes and you were only wanting to spend $80 on shoes and I wanted other ones, having to come up with money for that. So I think that we definitely have had both those experiences. But I think that, like you said, you've always been very open about money with me, whether that's saving money or if money was tight, or how to spend your money, how to shop the sales, or how to buy store brand things like that. I think that was something that was always just kind of taught to me, and it's definitely helped me in my adult life and helped me form financial habits in order to be smart about how I'm spending my money, saving my money, how striving to earn more money. I think all of that has just kind of stemmed from those topics that we talked about growing up. I think some of the lessons I've learned is that like I said earlier, buying the generic brands of things to save money. The store brand Doritos and the real Doritos are pretty similar to being the same thing. So, being able to save $2 or $3 here and there, and definitely how it adds up. And, knowing that, just I feel like a really common example is like, oh, going and getting a daily coffee, blah, blah, blah. In the grand scheme of things, $5 a couple times a week, you're not going to be saving tens of thousands of dollars off of that. But it definitely does make a difference. Making your coffee at home that money could go to pay your phone bill for the month, and give you a little extra money there, or it can allow you to go out to eat with your friends later on in the week or things like that. So I think that I've definitely always learned those lessons growing up about money. Money is really important to me because, like you said, growing up we didn't necessarily always have the money to do all the things that I wanted to do, or have the money to buy the things that I wanted to buy. And not that that's a bad thing. I think that that's actually helped me to be okay with, knowing that, you're not always going to get everything that you want or be able to do everything that you want. But being in that position has really put emphasis on money for me. Like I said, striving to make a good amount of money and being careful about what I do with that money and making sure to save a certain amount from all my paychecks and all that stuff. So I think that that has really helped money become important to me for sure.
Yeah. And, you guys went to school in a pretty affluent, I would say the majority of people had a lot of money. And so when it came to like your later teens, like you had friends who had some very, very nice cars that their parents were able to afford to buy for them. You have friends whose parents paid 100% of their college expenses, who maybe even after college are still contributing to the lifestyle that their child is living. No right or wrong way, right? Every family does it in a way that's different, but that's not what you
Sure.
experienced. And so you guys had to learn, that hey, if you wanted really nice things, like you said, you were going to find a way to really earn them for yourself. You guys never lacked anything. Your bellies were always full with delicious food.
Mm-hmm.
You always had cute clothes, but sometimes we had to find those compromises.
For sure.
And
And like you
so
said, I think, sorry to interrupt you. I think that a lot of, like you said, growing up, I didn't necessarily know that we're tight on money at times with things like that. Looking back at it, I can definitely tell, when I wanted, a little M&M or something as we were checking out in line at the grocery store, things like that. But in the moment, I didn't really think about it. But like you said, growing up, this school system we were in, there definitely, it wasn't, private school or anything super crazy. But like I said, a lot of kids that I was friends with did have parents that were, necessarily well off financially. So I think that was also something that I learned was knowing like, okay, just because my friends got bought nice brand new cars for the first car doesn't mean that I'm going to get bought that. Or just because my friends don't have to work because their parents are, able to provide for them while they're still in high school doesn't mean that I don't have to. So I think that's something too, is learning that what works for someone is not going to work for everyone. We weren't in the situation where you could 100%, pay for my gas and pay for all the going out to eat and stuff like that while I was in high school. But there are people who are able to do that. There were things that you did for me while I was growing up in high school, like that, some parents, the second you turn 16 and get a job, you have to start contributing to rent and buying groceries and stuff like that. So I think that it's really just important to figuring out what works for you and your family. And even what works for each individual kid. Like me, my older brother, and my older sister didn't have the same experience. There were certain things that I had to help out with that they didn't have to help out with. There were certain opportunities money wise that they got that I didn't get, or vice versa. So I think that that's important, is recognizing that not everything is going to be the same for every family nor for every child.
for sure. And one of the things I love, and you kind of alluded to it, that it taught you the value of a dollar, which is really important for kids to learn. But it also makes you not entitled. Like you don't walk around acting like the world owes you something. You really are driven to, if you want X lifestyle, you're going to do what it takes. You three kids have always been wired very differently when it comes to money. And I won't call anybody out, but even when they were little, we'd be at Target and I would give you all the same amount of money. And one of you would come back and you'd be like, how much more do I have to spend? Right? I'm going to buy this one thing. How much more do I have to spend? And they would go out into the store and they would find something that costed, like every penny was spent out of that money that I gave them. Another one of you would come to me and say, if I buy this and it was one teeny tiny thing, how much money will I have left to save? Right? Didn't want to spend all the money. Sometimes didn't even spend any of the money, right? And the third one of you would go and you'd find something that you really wanted and you would buy it. And then you'd be like, okay, well, what I have left, you'd never spend all your money, this third child, and would save that right for the next time when maybe there was something bigger that was wanted. But very, very different styles, different patterns. Even as I see you guys emerging into your adulthood, the choices that you make, the things that are your currencies, like for you, money is really important. It is a tool that you have learned how to use really well. And it is probably one of your top goals, right? Is to make sure that you have the money to do and live the lifestyle that you want to live. Another one of your siblings, one of their currencies is spending quality time with their people. And so they care more about that than necessarily picking up the extra shifts or working extra hours to have more money in order to do more things.
Mm.
So everybody approaches it differently, and every child, that was a really good point, is going to be different in your family, but they all need to know about a core set of concepts before they leave your home, right? So the four we've kind of identified, and we'll just kind of work through them, but is savings, spending, budgeting, and credit. So let's start with savings, Cayd. You happen to be an extremely good saver. All three of you kids from an early age like grasped onto the concept of having to save, mostly because I made you save 50% of everything you earned from your jobs to put towards college tuition, right? So that was a habit that you guys had in doing. Can you kind of talk about how that helped you and what your kind of push towards savings is now, and what savings affords you and what it makes you feel?
For sure. So like you said, I think like my earliest memories of savings were when I first turned 16. Actually, I started working at 14, but when I first turned 14, got my first job and started getting my paycheck, something that you had us do was save 50% of our paycheck, which 50% is a big portion of the paycheck. That's not realistic for a lot of people, especially, once you get to my age and you're out in the working world and you're paying rent or you're paying a mortgage and you have bills. But, as a 14-year-old, you really don't have that much to spend your money on. You're not making a car payment, you're not making rent, you're not, whatever. So most of my money was fun money. So 50% I feel like was a pretty reasonable amount. And it was going towards college tuition. So I think that helped too. But so that was my really first memory of saving. And I think that has really helped me to be the saver that I am today. My savings is something that I'm really proud of and I've worked hard towards. And I've been saving up money for the past, what would that be, 7 years, ever since I was 14, to, grow that savings and be able to have it there as my little safety net. But yeah, so I think that savings is a great tool that can be used to either, like I said, be a safety net for if something does happen in your life, whether that's a medical emergency or you lose your job or you have to move unexpectedly or anything like that, have car problems. Savings is a great thing to have, whether it's $100, $1,000, $10,000, whatever it is. I think that it's really important to save. Another thing that saving has taught me, like you said, with us having to transfer over 50% of our paychecks into our savings, it has really helped me to just be able to say, okay, if my paycheck, just for easy numbers, was $500, I would transfer over $250 to my savings. And then I had that $250 to work with for the rest of whether it was 2 weeks or a month or however long until I was getting paid next. So I think that is something that's really important about savings, is it kind of teaches you how to spend the money that you do have left over. So that's kind of my thing with savings. I think it's a great tool. I think a lot of times when people talk about money, they talk about income and they talk about spending and budgeting, but I think that savings is something that's missed a lot. And like I said, it covers a lot between medical emergencies, car problems, you lose a job, you have to move, maybe you're even just saving so you can buy a cool new hoodie or something like that. Whatever it is, I think that savings is, in my opinion, one of the best tools that you can have in money. But I mean, what have you experienced saving wise as you were a young adult and then you were a parent and now you're still a parent, but you don't really have to save for your kids, sports activities or anything like that? How has savings been for you?
Yeah, and I used to save for all of those things that were, because for instance, back to school time, we lived in a school district where they charged a curriculum fee. When we moved from Minnesota to Kansas, I had never heard the word curriculum fee. And so we moved here and it was partway through the year, so it was prorated. But that was an unbudgeted expense of several $100s. And so it was closer to $1,000 for the full year. And so I saved a little bit at a time every paycheck so that when the next year came, I would have money for that large expense. And so I learned the pattern kind of my family and of my kids and when that money would be important. I see what it has done for you guys, like for instance, one of your siblings has a car problem, right? They do have that emergency fund there in order to, if the repair is bigger than what they had available in their checking account, they're able to do that and then refurbish some of that money over time. I've seen you with savings save for things you really wanted to do, like you've taken some really big trips, and I've watched you make conscious decisions about not spending money and putting extra in savings. So it's not that you're putting money in savings and never touching it. Like, it's not that you're afraid to spend that money, you're just using it in a way that works for you. And
Sure.
while we're on the topic of savings, like especially something that I wish I would have known or that would have been pushed a little harder when I was younger was start saving for that retirement right away. When you get your
Hmm.
first real job, the first big kid job, like start saving for that retirement right away and don't ever touch it for no reason.
Hmm.
Don't ever take a loan out against it. Don't, because that is the one thing long term. You know, we never know what we're going to be able to count on when we retire, but that is something like you talked about. If you have that money taken out of your check immediately, you don't even know it's there, and then you learn to spend within your means. The economy is tight right now. We all know that it is very expensive for young kids to live on their own. But, you know, things like roommates, things like living at home with mom and dad for a little while, things like driving an older car, ways that you can, even if it's a small amount every month that you're contributing
Hmm.
towards that retirement fund when you're just starting out, is just such a great habit to get into and so important. So those are
For
the things
sure.
about savings that I
And
would.
that was something that you pushed onto me as far as like retirement and stuff. When I first got my first big boy job and the topic of 401k came up, blah, blah, you hear, oh, save when you're young, or, start, contributing to your 401k, blah, blah, blah. But it is hard, when you're early 20s, you start your first job, or late 20s, or whatever time it is that you start. It's hard to think about, okay, well, what is life going to look like when I'm 70? Why am I missing out on this money now just to have it when I'm 70, 80, 90? But that was a conversation that we had, and you just saying that you wished you had started earlier. And I have a certain percentage of money that comes out of my paycheck every paycheck and goes to my 401k. And like you said, it's kind of just out of sight, out of mind. I've never, that money has automatically been coming out of my paycheck, so it's not like I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I'm missing X amount of dollars. Being able to know that it's in savings and know that it's there and know that I'm just having to live without it. And I think that kind of goes into the next kind of key point you brought up of spending. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, if you do save a certain, whether it's 5% or it's 10% of whatever you make, or it's $50 out of your paycheck, or it's $5 out of your paycheck, I think learning to spend what you have left over is a great tactic. So, I mean, as far as spending goes, Mom, do you have anything specific that you'd like to bring up? Any tips, tricks, anything like that?
Yeah, so the savings is to pay yourself first, right? When you get your gross income and you pay yourself first. Spending, you've obviously got bills. Like as you become a young adult, like you're probably going to have rent, you're probably going to have utilities, you may have a car payment, car insurance, like all of these things that potentially you didn't know existed. I remember when one of my kids got their very first medical bill and they're like, why did it cost so much for me to go to the doctor? Well, that's what happened. And so as a parent, you can't think of every possible scenario to talk to your kids
Hmm.
about, but I think it's important for parents to actually sit down with their kids and show them, okay, here's what I make. Here's what I get in my paycheck. This is my net paycheck. Here's the
Hmm.
list of bills that we have to pay to take care of this family. And here's what's left over. This is called discretionary income, right? And here's
Hmm.
what's left over. And from those things, we need to pay for our food, we need to pay for gas, we need to pay for our activities, we need to pay for the vet bill, all of these things, right? That can come in beyond the fixed expenses we have every month. But I think it's important for kids to understand that, you can't just spend what's left of your paycheck after you pay yourself first in the form of savings.
Hmm.
You have got to pay your bills first, right? But they need to
Hmm.
understand what that looks like. And so one of the things, we use a credit union, and one of the things one of my kids does is they set up special purpose savings accounts. And so every single paycheck, there's some money that goes to the fund for their dog's vet bill, and there's some money that goes to a vacation fund, and little ways that you can do additional savings. You're going to spend the money. It's money that's to
Hmm.
be spent, but it's ways that you can set yourself up for success. And then not all of a sudden, oh my gosh, my car tags are due and they're $300. And that's an
Hmm.
expense you didn't know you were going to have. So I think it is important for sure to do something with your money that makes you feel good. And so, we talked about in our health series, we talked about addictions, and there are some people who have addictions to shopping. Let's just scroll
Hmm.
through Amazon and find what we want to buy, but that comes at a cost, right? Because then you might not have that money available to you for other things. So being
Hmm.
conscious about what you're buying, conscious of your spending, plan for things. Like I know, for instance, Cayd, I'll have you tell us kind of like what you've adopted with your food budget and how you
Hmm.
how you do that. But I think it's really important to walk through the steps with your kid about how the bills happen, and then to look at what do you have left for your discretionary money, and where would you like to
For
spend
sure.
it. And if you've got $500 left and you normally budget 200 for food for a single person for that pay period, but all of a sudden your food budget or your food cost went to 225, you've got to pull that $25 from somewhere else. So
Hmm.
what does that look like? So tell us a little bit. Food is a good example for you because I like the way you've set yourself up for this. But how do you buy your food
Hmm.
besides stealing
For
my
sure.
Sam's Club card out of my wallet?
So the way, I mean, I buy my food is my mom and Tim have a Sam's Club membership, and I will take their card, go to Sam's, and pretty much I just don't like grocery shopping. I don't like going to the store every week. I don't like any of that. So I do all my grocery shopping in one day for the whole month, which seems like a lot, but I also am only grocery shopping for one person, so it makes it a little bit easier. But I will go ahead and buy all my meat for the meals I'm going to prep. I'll buy, a couple pounds of rice. I'll buy all the fruit for my smoothies. I'll buy Greek yogurt. I'll buy it all in bulk from Sam's. There's a couple things I get from Dillon's, which is our local grocery store, but pretty much I get it all at once in one month. And several reasons why that works for me. One, like I said, I don't like grocery shopping. Two, I just freeze everything. I freeze all of the meat and then take it out as I need it. All the fruit is frozen, all that sort of thing. So that works for me. But two, spending wise, it's really helped me to lock in and look at what I'm spending on food. It's easy to say, okay, if I'm going to the store twice a week and just running in and grabbing things for the next couple of days and then running out, it's easy to drop $60 here, $80 here, $100 here, $60, and then that adds up. But for me, I found it easy to just go everything at once and say, okay, I'm spending around $400, $350 ish a month on groceries, and I can track that a little bit easier. That's what makes sense for me. The day we're filming this, I actually just went to Sam's this morning and bought stuff. And there's some months where it's less. If I have leftover fruit for my smoothies, I don't buy fruit in that month. Or if I have extra yogurt, then I'm not buying that. So it does vary, but I think that is something that has been beneficial for me to look at my spending. But like you said, I do think as a parent, it is important to talk about spending with your kids, like you talked about with getting your paycheck and taking out all your bills and then looking at what you have left. On the topic of paycheck, like taxes was something that I learned about very early on. There were a lot of kids my age, when we started working at 16, 17, 18, that didn't understand why net their income was $400, and then once they got it, it was only 250. So I think that is something that I also learned was knowing that, okay, just because you got paid $400 doesn't mean that your check is going to be $400. And like you said, even though I wasn't paying rent at 14, 15, 16, being able to see, okay, this is what we're paying for our housing, this is what we're paying for our electric bill, I think has kind of helped me be in that mindset. So now as I've gotten older and I am contributing to pay rent for the house and making car payments and things like that, it's helped me to already previously I've been aware of those expenses and know that they're coming up, and let it not throw you for a loop. And kind of on the topic of discretionary income that you were talking about too, that is something too that I see with a lot of people my age is they, pay all their bills, blah, 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 whatever. And then they've got $500 left over for the next 2 weeks until they get paid. And they blow it all in that first week. And then they spend the next week struggling and, just waiting till payday. So that way they can do it, pretty much do it all again. And it is kind of a cycle. So I think that is something that needs to be an open conversation. That's something that we've talked about, is knowing, okay, you've got $200 left over after you've paid everything off, but when do you get paid next? And, for some people that they get paid every 2 weeks for their job, they get paid every month. Some people, earlier on, I used to babysit. So, I might have 3 days of babysitting one week, and then I might not babysit again for a month. So I think that is something that we always talked about spending wise, was just kind of, knowing, okay, you've got this extra money, but how are you going to spend it and how long are you going to spend it? Or how long do you have to spend it? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I know there were even times with any or all of you where you would take, okay, here's my $500 I have for the next 2 weeks, and immediately would take 250 of that and put it in your savings account, knowing that you could draw that 250 once that first week was over, out of sight, out of mind, right? And you could believe what your checkbook was telling you as you're going to the ATM or going out to eat with your friends. And just that being intentional about what you're spending it on. Do you really need that shirt? One thing that was really helpful for me in learning about, being thoughtful and intentional about spending money was how many hours would I have to work to buy that thing? And am I
Mm-hmm.
willing to do that? Am I willing to, back when I worked in corporate, am I willing to sit in this office for this number of hours to own this thing? And that
Mm-hmm.
was really helpful for me to actually put in perspective of what it was. And would I rather have my 5 coffees every morning during the work week, or would I rather be able to go out with my friends twice on the weekend and have some quality time with them? And so it's all about making those choices and doing what works for you and doing what makes you feel good. But there's always got to be a little bit of something fun in there for you. Otherwise, what are we working for, right? Like, we have
For
to have a
sure.
roof over our heads, we have to have food, but you
Mm-hmm.
also deserve to enjoy spending a little bit. But
Exactly.
um,
And I think that's a good point is, whether it's you like buying new clothes or you like going out to eat or you like going out with your friends or you like, for me, it's taking trips or you like, being able to buy new technology, whatever it is, I think it's important to spend some of your money on something fun. And I think kind of all of that segues into budgeting. You know, it's important to budget to save money, to budget to pay your bills, to budget to give yourself a little extra spending money. I know growing up, for us at least, budgeting was always something that you did. You tried different ways of budgeting. Maybe switched it up then from doing it in an Excel sheet to then doing it on paper to finding a planner to, different things like that. So budgeting, I think, is something that I was always aware of and kind of knew about and was talked about in our family. So, I mean, as far as budgeting goes, how has that helped you financially? How have you seen us budget and all that?
yeah, and for me, the biggest piece of budgeting is just it helps so much with cash flow. Like, some months are more expensive than others. Like I talked about back to school, right? When I had kids,
Mm-hmm.
August was brutal because they needed school supplies and you had to pay that curriculum fee and they needed new tennies and new clothes and budgeting for things that are coming up. Birthdays, you have an April birthday and your brother has a May birthday and they're close together. And so we've got the birthday celebrations plus the birthday gifts. And sometimes that could
Mm-hmm.
all add up and be expensive. So it's really starts with tracking like those things, what you have coming up, what you're going to need money for, and then figuring out where's that money coming from. And there's tons of different budgeting apps out there. I am very old school. I am pen to paper. I know Cade's kind of adopted that same.
Uh-huh.
There is something about when I write it and it just solidifies in my head. My husband loves spreadsheets, and so he's more in the spreadsheet thing. So we kind of have split things. I write it all out on paper first, and then he puts it in the spreadsheet. Makes him feel better. I feel better because I've got it written out. But you have to do what works for you. But consult. There's so much out there. If you just Google, like, a budgeting categories, even to know what
Mm-hmm.
to budget for. Like, there's things that you wouldn't think about having to budget for. Like, this is going to date me, but back in the day, you actually used to like send things in the mail. You had to send your bills in the mail. And so you needed stamps. Well, stamps right now are 60 some cents a piece. And so a book of stamps
Mm-hmm.
is now pretty expensive. And like, that was an example. I used to budget for stamps because I knew that I would be buying a book or two, a month. I used to send out pretty little cards that I would make for people.
Mm-hmm.
And so all those things that you may not know that you need to budget for, shampoo and conditioner doesn't magically appear in the shower like a lot of kids think it does. Like, somebody
Mm-hmm.
had to work to earn the money to get that, but how much does all that stuff cost? So it's fun to take your young adult to the grocery store with you or to Target with you and give them a calculator and have them, an old fashioned calculator that you actually have to push buttons on so they can see it on a big screen. They could do their phone in a pinch, but it's just interesting and helps them to really know, okay, in the bath and body category, I'm going to need this much money. In the health or in the home, like the house upkeep budget, I'm going to need
Mm-hmm.
this much money. Car upkeep, a lot of kids are having to drive older cars right now because cars have gotten so expensive and interest rates are so high. And so they're having to drive older cars. But then you also potentially are on the hook for repairs. So how are you going to budget that? And that's hard because you look at that money and you're like, oh, there's $600 sitting over there in that budget category for car repairs. I could just take that and take
Mm-hmm.
a trip somewhere. And then you get home and the next week your car breaks down. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
just really important to talk through those things. And if it's not your parent, if you have a parent who's not good at budgeting. Like I said, there are some new BFFs on social media you could follow, or talk to a family member or talk to an older friend that you have that could maybe help you out with that and figure what's realistic. And as
Mhm.
parents, I think it's important that you be honest with your kids. Like, I remember my kids' jaws dropped to the floor when I told them that, okay, I now have 3 young adult drivers, plus I had their dad, plus me, and we had 3 cars, and our car insurance was $765 a month with good student discounts and multiple policy discounts. Like that was the
Mhm.
lowest price I could find. But they were shocked. Like, they would have had no idea that I was spending that much money on something to do that. So
Yeah.
being honest about the budgeting and just spending the time to sit down and write it out, and then to check in with your budget. So, whether it's once a week you're sitting down, I know some people who that is one of the first things they do every morning is sit down and they double check their mobile banking and make sure that nothing unexpected has come out, and make sure that things are as they should be, and then checking in every time you get paid to obviously make sure set up
Mhm.
as much stuff on auto payment as you can, but anything you can't set up through your bill pay functionality, just making sure when that stuff is due, so you're not getting late fees and things like that. So
Mhm.
knowing the timeline is just as important as knowing the dollar amounts when you're doing budgeting, so you can see how that cash is going to flow. Sometimes if you get paid every 2 weeks, you have 2 months out of the year where you have 3 paychecks. That's happening to both
Mhm.
my husband and to Cayd this month. And it would be really easy to take all of that money and just go blow it on something, right? Or spend it for a vacation or whatever. But
Mhm.
then you realize it's like, ooh, things like my electric bill, I don't only pay those once a month. Sometimes I have to pay them twice in a month because it's every 4 weeks. And so
Uh-huh.
really learning the logistics, right? And the only
Yeah.
way to do that is to be hands on with what you're doing. And so sometimes all of the spending controls and budgeting that we have going on sometimes is not enough. And so there's a couple ways to approach that, right? You can either get an additional job, get a new job, try to earn more money.
Mhm.
You can try to rein in your spending, whatever that might look like. They used to talk about the latte factor, like the money that you're spending at Starbucks, cut those things from your budget. Well, a lot of people right now don't have anything left in their budget to cut. And so that can be really, really difficult. But credit, which sometimes is a necessary evil, there are financial experts out there that will tell you should never have credit. You should pay for everything in cash. But in the United States of America, like, if you're going to go buy a house or you're going to go buy a car, unless you can buy those two things in cash, you have to have credit.
Mhm.
And when I went to college, literally the credit card companies, this is the worst thing that ever happened to college students in the 80s, but credit card companies had a table when you first got to school, right? Fall of your freshman year, you got to school, and there's all these MasterCard and Visa companies and handing out t-shirts, just sign up for this credit card.
Mhm.
And nobody had talked to kids in the 80s about credit cards and what that debt would look like when they got out, right? And so, I think now kids are wiser to what credit
Mhm.
looks like. There's more information accessible to them, but it still sounds like the magic bullet, right? Like, you can just get a credit card and you can just charge stuff on it. And sometimes it's necessary to use a
Mhm.
credit card. Sometimes it's necessary to get a loan for a car. But Cayd,
Mhm.
you're kind of the expert in this in the house because you work as a loan officer. So
Yes,
not
for
in your
sure.
official capacity, but what information would you, just from your experience, would you recommend to young adults, and parents can maybe learn something too? There's a lot of parents out there that are really drowning in credit card debt
Mhm.
right now. So what is your experience been with that, and what advice can you give about credit cards and loans?
Yeah. So, like you said, Mom, I am a consumer loan underwriter. So, that is what I do all day, 40 plus hours a week. So, I do have a lot of experience both in my job, both as well as in my personal life, just doing my own research and all that good stuff. So, credit is just overall a big topic and is a little scary to a lot of kids my age. A lot of my friends come to me because they know my job and will ask about credit cards or loans or what that looks like. Like Mom said, there are some people who don't think you should ever get credit. You should stay away from it and it's evil. I even know for a while growing up, I thought that, I just thought that, you never should get credit or you should only get credit if you're really struggling or things like that. But in America, it is kind of a necessary evil. And I think that credit can also be used to your advantage if it's used correctly. So, I mean, just kind of starting off, I think that credit cards are like the biggest topic when it comes to credit. And like I said, a lot of people they turn 18 and they get a credit card or they, sign up for their, whatever store you're shopping at, your Target credit card, or I know like Ulta credit card, the makeup store is a big one, things like that. Just sign up for it. You think that it's money and you just get to spend all this money and blah, blah, blah. But interest rate is what gets a lot of people on those credit cards. You know, those interest rates are high in the 20, 30, sometimes 40%. So I think that credit cards, my advice with those is credit cards play a big part in your overall credit score. You have what's called your revolving utilization, which is how much of your credit limit that you're using. So if you get your first credit card and you have an $1,000 limit on that, they say that the best thing to do is to keep it under a 30% utilization. So in that case, it would be less than $300 on that card. So even though you have an $1,000 limit, you don't want to spend that full $1,000 on the card. Ideally, what you want to do is you want to pay that card off every time that it's due. You want to pay it off completely. That way you're not paying interest. That way there isn't a balance reporting to your credit report. That is really the best thing to do. And again, we are not experts. This has been my experience. This is what I've learned, what I've tried, what I see daily in work. There's some people that say you should keep a little bit of money on your credit cards. There's some people that say you should pay them off. There's some people that say it doesn't matter. So I think it's really just important to figure out what works for you. So that would be my advice with credit cards is you do need them. They are beneficial. They are great in case of an emergency. If you need a little extra money, like mom said, kind of with budgeting, sometimes that isn't enough. Sometimes you budget and you plan to spend your money and you get to week and a half and you're not paid for another 3-4 days, but you need groceries in the house or your car registration is due or something like that. So credit cards can be beneficial. They can be beneficial to help you get more credit in the future. They can be beneficial to help you with your spending habits, but they can also be very dangerous. You don't want to get a credit card and max it out. You don't want to get a credit card and, miss your payments because that can hurt your credit score just as much as it can benefit your credit score. So that is a big thing for young adults is credit cards. Another thing, obviously, car loans, things like that. Like, again, like mom said earlier, car loan interest rates are very high right now. So if you're looking to buy a car, now might not be the best time. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't consider, both young adults and, older adults. They think, okay, I'm able to spend $400 a month on a car payment. That's the max I'm wanting to spend. People don't consider that 2 years ago, you could get a car payment for $400 and get maybe a $50,000 car loan because interest rates were 2%. But now interest rates are up to 6, 7, and 8% as the lowest. So if you're looking to get a $400 car payment, you might only be looking at a $25,000 car instead of a $50,000 car. So interest is something that plays a big role in that. But again, having those credit cards and having good payments on your credit cards is going to help you to get a lower interest rate on your auto loans or on your mortgage or on whatever it is. So again, it all kind of goes and it all can be beneficial. If you have some credit cards and you keep low balances and you make your payments on your car loan, obviously in the future, that's going to be able to help you to get a lower mortgage rate or get approved for a higher mortgage. So credit is something that and it's very tricky. It's very complicated. There's a lot of mixed reviews out there, but I would just encourage all of you to go and do your own research and talk to people. If you have someone who maybe works in the lending industry or works in banking, or you have someone who maybe has filed bankruptcy and rebuilt their credit and, has kind of gone through that process to relearn it, talk to them and be open about it. Like I said, me and a lot of my friends have open, honest conversations about that, of how, their actions might be affecting their credit score and how their credit score can open doors for them in the future and how it can also, prevent them from doing the things they want to do.
Yeah. And one of the things, go ahead.
I was going to just say, growing up, I know we talked about credit a lot and what that looks like. So I was just going to ask, what your opinion on that is and what you've seen.
Yeah, I think, what I was going to say is, I've kind of counseled you guys, like, yes, you should get a credit card and learn how to use it. So where we started with you guys was, let's get a credit card with the local credit union, right? A low amount, and let's just charge your gas on it. And then like before we could kind of get to the point of, well, just pay it in full every month. It was, okay, you just charged this much gas this week. At the end of the week, I want you to transfer that amount of money to your credit card. And then it became, okay, every payday, what have you spent the last 2 weeks? Transfer it to your credit card to kind of get you in that habit. And there are some benefits, if you can do things like that and you have a cashback card, like you can find ways to actually have the things you're purchasing cost you less, but you then have to be able and willing to pay it off in full at the end of the month, because otherwise that interest is gobbling up anything you're earning through the cashback program. So I think it is important to start small. I think it's important to kind of work your way up until you know that you can trust yourself, and getting help early if you find yourself with an issue, getting help early rather than waiting. And like Cayd said, consulting with some legit experts, if you find yourself in a tough spot, because this economy is hard. And I work really hard as a parent to encourage my kids, especially as they're moving out on their own and they're finding it very, very expensive. What are the things they can do, and what are the things they need to consider that maybe didn't come to mind, right? I know my oldest son would love to get a new car, but when we actually look at how much the car costs, and like Cayd said, the interest rates, it's like, nope, I'm going to drive this one I have, which used to be my car, until it dies. And so there's choices like that can be made, but a lot of times kids just need encouragement from their parents to do things that are maybe outside the mainstream of what their friends are doing. Because if everybody's going and getting new cars and everybody's charging their dinner on their credit card and everybody, around and around we go, buying new clothes all the time, taking big vacations that they haven't saved for, that can be really hard to make those smart choices when you're surrounded by people who maybe necessarily are not making the wisest choices. I know Cayd, a lot of his friends are a little bit older, having gotten a job when he was young, and he worked in a restaurant. And so a lot of the servers are people that were servers, good friends of his. So they're a little bit older. So they're kind of all looking at the same things, which is, okay, well, if I ever do want to buy a house in the future, what does my credit need to look like to get to that point? So even just talking to people who are a little bit ahead of you on the path sometimes is very helpful.
Sure. And I think it's important, like you said, especially in this economy where we're in right now, I think it's important to be honest about your finances, especially, and, again, this is all up to individual preference. You don't need to say, hey, mom, I have X amount of dollars in my bank account, or tell your friends, you make this much money or whatever. But with family, with friends, my close group of friends, we're all very honest about, if one of us is trying to save money, we'll maybe, instead of going out to eat, we'll just hang out at their house for the night and, make a frozen pizza or something and just eat that. So I think that it's important to be honest about your finances, especially between parents and kids. And I think it goes both ways. If I'm a kid and I'm struggling financially, you might have experience in something and be able to help me through that or give me guidance or whatever. And, check in with me and say, hey, I know, you had this savings goal. Do you want, how's it coming? Or I know you were trying to cut back on buying clothes, how are you doing that? So I think that that's important, but I think it's also just as important for parents to be honest with their kids about their finances. Obviously, again, depending on their age, depending on the relationship, that honesty and that communication looks different. But growing up, there were times where you just said, we can't get that right now. Obviously when I was younger, it was, that was kind of it. But then as I got older, it was, hey, we can't get that right now because, it's the middle of June in Kansas and it's 106 and our electric bill is through the roof because we've been blasting the AC. So I think that it's just important to be honest about it. And I think that helps just everyone around.
It does, because then the kids learn, right, that you're human and money doesn't grow on trees, even though I have a money tree in my office. It has yet to produce any dollar bills, but we're hoping someday it will. But yeah, it's important for kids to know that there are times when their parents have maybe struggled. Now, there are some parents out there who have not struggled and who either through the decisions they've made or through being extremely blessed and lucky because there's family money or they've landed in a really high paying industry. There are families where money is not a struggle, but I do see some of those kids who never were talked to about money, and money was never a struggle for their parents, but at some point it becomes a struggle for them. And to me, it doesn't make me very approachable as a parent if I've pretended, so in our situation, we weren't independently wealthy. So if I had pretended that we were to my kids and not let them know that sometimes there was not enough money to do X, Y, or Z, we're going to have to wait to go see Willy Wonka movie until after we get paid next week, rather than going right now. If I had never done that and had never had those conversations with the kids, or I'm choosing to buy X car over this car because the car payments will be this much less, it wouldn't make me very approachable if they're struggling to come to me if I had pretended like everything was always perfect. So if you're working with that younger end of the teen scale, start now as they're getting their first jobs, having those conversations about all things finances, and be willing to share your own journey and what that has looked like. Be willing to share the mistakes you've made and how you rebuilt after that, or how you made pivots and did different things. At the end of the day, money is just a tool, and it's
Hmm.
in this country, right? You have to have money in order to have your basic needs met. So it is an important tool. Therefore, we should have all the lessons that go with the tool in order to make us successful. But money is not who you are. Whether you
Hmm.
have a lot or you have a little, it's what you choose to do with it, right? And the quality of life that you create from that. There are some of the happiest people I know that have some of the lowest paychecks I know. And I know some people with some really big paychecks that are miserable, and
Hmm.
sometimes they're miserable human beings as well. So it's there's no judgment on it. It's just an innate tool that we have, or inanimate tool that we have. Like, we don't need to put judgment behind it. We don't need to treat it as anything more than a tool that it is, where we are trading time for dollars. That's essentially what we're doing,
Sure.
and then we're choosing what we spend those dollars on. So,
And it
and I think it's
it
important.
definitely is.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead. No, you
It's
go.
important to problem solve together. So you can make your kids, especially your older kids, part of a conversation. If there's a problem you guys are trying to solve, it might be choosing one vacation over another, and you thought you were going to go on the Disney cruise, but then all of a sudden reality comes in and you can't afford to drop that kind of money on a Disney cruise. And so talking to your kids about why you're going to choose to go stay at the Airbnb at the beach instead. So I think it's really important to problem solve those things together. So then when your child is having a problem, right? Like, oh my goodness, mom, I'm going to find myself this much short this month. What am I going to do about it? Well, are you going
Yeah.
to, do some babysitting gigs for your friends' kids? Are you going to go pick up a part-time job? Are you going to sell some stuff on Facebook Marketplace? Like, what's the plan? How are we going to solve
Hmm.
this? So, okay, what were you going to say?
Well, I think like you just emphasizing that money is a tool. Money doesn't innately make life easier. It doesn't. Does it? Is it easier to not have to worry about your mortgage being paid than having to worry about it? Yes. Is it easier to know that you have the money in your account to go on a trip whenever you'd like? Yes. Um, but the amount of money isn't necessarily as important of how you spend it. Um, I think that it's important to just know that no matter how much you're making, no matter what position you're in, you can definitely work to change it if you would like, and work to, even just change your life with the money that you do have. I think that it's a great tool that you can use to benefit you, but it can also be something that if you don't know how to use it right, can hurt you. But I mean, with that, is there anything else, Mom, that you would like to add about parents and adult kids with their money and all that stuff?
Yeah, I would just like to hit back on the boundaries topic, which I know I bring up every single podcast episode we have. But, these are young adults you are dealing with, the word being adult. And so they may not want to share their finances with you. In our family, the way we have it set up is I am actually a co-signer on each of the kids' accounts because they are single. And there's legal reasons why you want to do that. There's reasons why you want beneficiaries on your account. So talk to your banker. Two of the three kids that live here are also signers on our bank accounts, so that if something were to happen to us and they needed access to the money to pay the mortgage or whatever that might be, they have the
Mm-hmm.
ability to do that. So we choose not to hide things here. It's kind of funny because on our mobile apps, like, we've kind of pretty much, most of us, hidden everybody else's accounts because we just don't want to have to look at
Mm-hmm.
that all the time. We
Yeah.
don't care. I don't care how Cayd is spending
Uh-huh.
his money, unless every single week he's like, mom, can I borrow $300? Like, then we're going to have a conversation
Exactly.
about why that's happening. But I think it's important to have those boundaries. And if you are uncomfortable talking about money, I would challenge you as a parent. I would challenge you to dive into that and see why that makes you uncomfortable and what the limiting beliefs are and what are the stories that you've told yourself about money and what
Mm-hmm.
your money means about you. Dig into that so that you are then in a place where you can talk to your kid. I think there's a lot of times parents try to tell their kids where to spend their money, and
Mm-hmm.
it is their money. And so for my kids, yeah, they had to put 50% in their savings. That was a non-negotiable while they were living in my house and they were not in college. But as far as what they did with their extra money, they got to do what they wanted to do, and that started at a very young age and continues now. Like, I would never say to Cayd, oh my goodness, look at the size of that slab of salmon you bought. Like, that had to cost you a lot of money. Maybe you should have bought ground turkey instead. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't say that, because if he's got the money and he's managing his money because that's his responsibility, that's where the boundaries come in. So
For
it's
sure.
that not trying to control your young adult and where they're spending the money. It's also, as a parent, having a boundary of, you know what, after you're age 18, I really don't financially responsibly owe you anything, right? Like anything that you as a parent give to your kids after the age of 18 to me is icing on the cake, right? I wanted my kids to be set up for a certain level of success. Therefore, I made choices that work for our family to continue to support you guys in certain ways financially, right? Beyond you graduating from high school. And so I think every family needs to look at that. Every set of parents needs to look at that and decide it's not right or wrong. I know some families who have 18-year-olds who they said, you are on your own, 100%, like you're paying for everything. That kid is doing just fine. I know other families who have kids that are 25, 30, and those kids are still getting some of their bills paid by their parents. So I have my own personal opinions about that I won't share here. But again, I've always said if your kids can, let them. So that will tell you kind of how I feel about that. But really the boundaries and just respecting those boundaries. Kids don't have a right to demand of you once they're over 18 to demand any kind of support or money from you. And really your primary responsibility is making sure you're going to be taken care of in retirement so that you don't become a burden to them. Although I jokingly tell my kids I'm going to buy a little trailer, little Silverstream trailer, and I'm going to go park it on a beach. And then when I get lonely for them, I'm going to come park in their driveway and come and see them. So it would be a cheap way to not have to pay rent, but I might expect them to feed me.
Sure.
I spent lots of years feeding them.
Exactly, but that would be it. But I think one last thing I would like to add is just to encourage everyone that, whether it comes to money, budgeting, credit, your income, spending, anything like that, you have the power to change all of it. If you don't feel like you're making enough money, start the search to get either another job or a better job. Or if your credit is bad, know that you do have the power to make it better. Or also, if your credit is great and you decide to not make a couple payments or max out all your credit cards, you also have the power to hurt your credit. Or you have the power to, if you're getting to, the end of the second week of without a payday and, you're just counting down the hours until that check gets your account. I think it's just really important to know that everyone has the power to change, and money is always changing. Things get more expensive, things get cheaper, interest rates change. It's always changing. So I think it's really just important to be flexible and all of that. But with that being said, I think that is a wrap of episode 6 of Raising Bigs.
Awesome. Thank you, Cayd. And thank you for all of our listeners today as we talked about money and how you can share and work together as a parent and an adult kid to have positive financial interactions and then to move towards financial independence for your young adult. We hope you've taken away a few nuggets and maybe a new perspective or two. Please share this podcast with others and be sure to subscribe. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Again, we are not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little easier for those who are listening. So if you need to communicate with us, you can find us at marcyhawkinson.com, or you can find us on social media. I am under Marci Hawkinson or Life Coach Marci on Instagram and Facebook. Cayd, how about you?
And I am the Cayd Berrigan across all platforms. So definitely go ahead and you can always follow us, interact with us, send us a DM, anything like that. If you have any topic suggestions, any questions, any additional comments, anything like that, we're always welcome to it. But we will see you all next time on Raising Bigs.
Love you, Cayd.
Love you too.